in my opinion, can make or break any kind of festival or convention. It's all about presentation. You know, we're packaging the product, and we're trying to sell our product to our customers, the dancers. Packaging is a major selling point and can help folks overlook shortcomings, you know, such as sound, floor, and climate control. If you've got good programming, you know, some of those other things might suffer a little bit, but sometimes they'll be overlooked. So programming is so important for that reason alone. Giving dancers the best bang for their buck, and I'm sure everybody's heard these same stories. And I can't tell you how often I've heard them. You know, where dancers attending conventions, they don't attend conventions because they don't want to spend $1,000. I mean, to go to a two-day state festival, it's going to cost $1,000 per couple. You know, to drive, food, hotel, and everything. And then they go there and dance to some guy that basically calls once a year at the state convention. You know, so that's what your goal needs to be when you're doing some programming. You need to be ready to give the best bang for the dollar. And I only see one con on programming, just one, and that's taking the heat. Okay, and you will never make everybody happy. There's no way you're going to make people happy, so don't even try. Stay focused. Stay focused on the best plan for your convention and your customers. But be prepared to even lose friendships over some of your decisions. I can just tell you, doing the Cincinnati, and I'm sure Ken's probably got a story or two, but when he did Springfield, but I can tell you there was people that just basically got mad at me that I thought were my friends because they didn't get 4 band slots instead of only 2.
Everybody loved me. I didn't have a friend.
It even got to the point where I was accused of being a racist when I was scheduled to Cincinnati National. So there's things that you're going to have to be ready to stand up to. You're going to have some thick skin. But remember, the reason you're doing this is for the activity, not for personal gain or anything like that. So, first I want to talk about programming a call-a-run festival, your own festival. I do about I run about 4 festivals myself a year and set up the programming. And so there's a few things you want to do that. They're a little bit easier than state conventions. All right, programming starts even before your weekend starts. All right, keep that in mind. Understand your demographics and who you're recruiting for your weekend. Obviously, you're not going to be recruiting brand new dancers for a DVD or tough DVD weekend. So that's where your programming starts. You need to make sure you're recruiting for the right type of dancer that you need for your weekend. Consider your levels and your dance space when you're doing this. With most of our weekends and festivals, our call-a-run ones are done in hotels, and sometimes you're using a school or things like that. You need to know what's going on. You need to consider your dance space and your levels. 3 levels and only 2 halls require some extra manipulation. All right? Oftentimes we do a lot of these share one hall with advanced in C1 and plus in the other, plus and rounds in the other. So there's going to be some manipulation. When you get your folks registered, and this is pretty cool. On all the flyers from my particular festivals, when you're registering folks, I put an area down there. Please check your primary dance level. If you just put please check your dance level, they'll check them all. But if you ask them to check their primary dance level on the flyer, then when they send in their registration fee or whatever the case, you can actually start looking at how many people you're going to have in each hall and where they're going to probably dance most of the time. Consider your staff. Only 2 callers for 2 halls will restrict your dance time in order to get the callers their proper rest. And we all know it's not as easy to call 13 hours a weekend or 14 hours or 15 or sometimes 18 hours a weekend and do a good job. So we got to make sure we rest our staff correctly. Consider what you're programming. Are you going to have some choreography, some special choreography sessions, intros, some of them old calls, hex, progressive, whatever. Look at where you're going to put those and your timing and things like that. These are things you want to consider for your own festivals. All singing call hour. I see that at a lot of festivals. Usually those work best if you do them in the end of the evening. A lot of times with your whole staff. especially on a Saturday night. You know, you've been dancing these people all day long, Friday and Saturday, and they're just ready to relax a little bit. Staff together, do some singing calls and things like that at the end. Here's another one that I see a lot on a lot of festivals, even have on a couple of ours, is recognizing your visiting callers that come to your festival by scheduling some call-a-rama time and letting them call. And that'll probably help sell your festival the next year. Put them on the stage, and they feel good, and you know they might go back home and say, hey, let's go to this guy's festival next year. You know, bring a square with you. So preparing the program, okay, and I'm going to kind of focus on programming a convention, but the same preparation needs to be done with just about anything you're working on. Are you going to be the program chairman? There's a difference. Or are you just doing the squares? In my case, I just did the squares. Now, I am going to be the program chairman for our Ohio State Convention next year. So under that falls all the other programs, rounds, lines, contra, whatever halls we're going to staff. So make sure you know that going in. Don't just say, hey, I'll be the program chairman, then find out you're doing it for 5 different, dance venues. Make sure you recruit team members who will add to your success if you are going to be the program chairman. Make sure if you've got 5 different dance venues, make sure you recruit 5 different leaders for those dance venues that know what they're doing. I didn't put this particular part in the presentation, but I'm a big advocate for programming to be done by callers and professional leaders. I'm not a big advocate for programming to be done by dancers. Not that they don't have their heart in the right place, but they just don't understand what's going on when it comes to dance levels, who can do those dance levels and things like that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Well, that's the next key. Dancers are calling, doing the schedules. Again, I feel like it's our responsibility as a leader and leader in your area. That's one of the reasons I did the Cincinnati convention. When we were out in Oklahoma, whatever, how many years back that was, when Cincinnati was awarded the bid, the first thing I did is I walked up to Steve Stair, who was going to be the general chairman, and I said, Steve, I didn't ask him, I said, Steve, I'm doing your programming, okay, because, Ohio's my state, and I felt, in my opinion, that I was probably the most qualified person to be doing the programming for the Cincinnati National Convention. And I wanted to make sure, actually I told him I'd do that and sound, because it's 2 important things for us. I'm not sure how Ken got started in it, but I'm sure he probably did the same thing. If you look at the callers in his area, he's got the kind of experience that I'm sure that they needed to have on the Springfield. Attend committee meetings. And I'm not a big fan of attending committee meetings, but attend the meetings to get an understanding of the overall objectives. This is where programming needs to be working in unison with, maybe the facilities people, special interest people, your education committees and things like that. You need to really, be a part of that activity as well, so that you can, design your programming along with everybody else's objectives. Learn the layout of your facility. This is especially if you're going to do big conventions. How many halls? Distance between the halls. You don't want a guy having to run a 300-yard marathon in 5 minutes to get to the next hall. The dance times and the levels, of course. Those are all things you need to consider. You'll need to map out a plan, and this is what we were talking about, in a spreadsheet or a software designed for programming. And I want to share NCOs with you in just a moment that Ken was talking about. It's a fantastic program. Barry Johnson was the originator of it. He's still tweaking it and putting it together, and we still provide feedback to him to make it better. And there's several states using it now. I think Illinois is using it. I'm not sure if Michigan's using it or not. There's a few other states that are actually using this program, and it's very good. And I'm going to share that with you in just a second. Time slots for each level. based on caller availability and dancer attendance, okay? So, used to, when we had 35,000 people going to our national conventions, it was not uncommon to have full-time halls for every level of square dancing. Now that's just not the case anymore. You know, national conventions now, we might be lucky if we have 4 squares of C2 dancers and 8 squares of C1 dancers, and you're just not going to schedule 18 or 16 hours a day in those halls. So you're definitely going to have to work knowing how many people are coming to your convention, how many people are going to be dancing in those particular halls, where you might want to join 2 halls together, alternate, you know, C1, C2, A1, A2, whatever the case may be, DVD, rounds, I don't know, what do you want to do? But you got to know how many dancers are coming, and you got to know how many callers are available to call those particular slots. A good example is the Ohio State Convention. We have all these different halls, but there's only 2 callers that actually go in there to call, that will call C1, myself being one, and another caller. And it's not like you want to schedule those 2 callers in the C1 hall the entire time. It's just not fair. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. All right? It's not fair to the callers, not fair to the dancers. Timing for special choreography sessions, intros, old calls, hex, progressive, etc. Sort of like what we're talking about with our personal festivals. Well, all our state and national festivals, there's a lot of time set aside for these kind of activities. Generally, they're done in the morning, workshops, intros, things like that. Sometimes in the afternoon, you'll see special interest sessions like progressive squares and hex and old calls and things like that. So you're going to have to really work your spreadsheet or your software program to make sure these things are put in there properly. So let's go to the NCOs before we go any farther. It's really cool. I won't share everything on the NCOs because there are some things that are maybe
It's top secret. If we
secret.
show you,
Yeah.
we'll have to kill you.
Yeah, exactly.
What does NCOS stand for?
National Convention Operating System or something like that.
Something like
Yeah.
that.
That's how, yeah.
I remember.
That's Barry Johnson. Let's see.
And the one good thing about this system is, for Springfield, I had 250 callers. It was a lot for a national. We don't get that many anymore. What was really neat about it was after you scheduled everybody's spots, all different spots, hundreds of spots, all you do is hit one button and everybody got an individual email with their spots. That to me was the beauty of it. You didn't have to go in and find Ray's spots and send them to Ray. And then you go and find Jeff's spots. You just hit, well, I don't know how they did it. But I said, that was a feature that really was exciting about it. While he's still looking for it, a couple of things too, is I know some of you raised your hand, you've scheduled before. I believe, and when I did it, talking with the NEC, I told them a few years before the Springfield Convention, I said, I'm going to do it the way Nationals used to have been scheduled, that the prime time evening spots were going to be given to the national callers and the ones, for the most part, that have worked their way up through the system. Because if you notice, at a national, maybe at others, sometimes people go out during the day, or they got tours. So a lot of people aren't dancing during the day when they come in at night. And I scheduled the big guns, so to speak, at the nighttime spots. And I'm still doing the same thing with my New England convention. I just scheduled the one that's coming up in 2 weeks. I know Bob has scheduled it a couple of times. I've done it several times. But I put what I feel is the more proficient callers in the evening spots. And I usually put them one right after another. So like you don't even want to leave the hall. And I feel that that's programming it for the dancers. It's not giving spots to my friends, because the really good, proficient callers are going to do a good job no matter what day or time they're going to be. And then on the other flip side, a lot of those callers aren't really going to add to a challenge program. In Springfield, we were very fortunate. The Northeast is pretty heavy with advanced challenge. I know you were there, and I had a full-time C2 hall, full-time C1, full-time A2, full-time A1, and we had them all in the same hotel, 2 floors from each other. You could literally walk from the C1 hall over to the C2 hall, and we even had 45 minutes of a 3A each day, because I had the dancers and I had the callers. And a lot of those callers that were in that hall were just such an attraction. When you think about it, it's like, round dancing. Roy can speak more about that. We don't schedule rounds, but there's a method and a reason. When you have a high level of a high quantity of challenge dancers, well, that's an audience that you can't overlook. The Nationals started telling me, well, we don't really have much interest in the challenge and stuff. They're not the bulk of the people, but you know what? Their money counts just as much as the people that come and want to just do rounds. I mean, there's hardcore, heavy-do round dance people that only come to dance in the round dance hall. They don't go into the square dance halls. They may not square dance at all. They don't do the lower level rounds. They're going in to do the phase 5s and 6, and they want to spend a whole weekend in the round dance hall. Well, at the one national I scheduled, there's dancers in the challenge and the advanced. That's all they want to do. They don't want to dance mainstream. They don't want to dance plus. So you have to give them an audience as well. Did you find it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good to go. So what you see on the screen right now is a simple menu area. If you look across the top, we could go to registration. I can check to see who's registered. We can make sure all the callers that want to call are registered. If you want to go look at committee reports and things like that. Services, volunteers, system, all kinds of different things, but the key one for programming is going to fall under schedule. And then one of the things we can do is, first thing, we're going to go in and assign time slots, okay? So basically, we're told what halls we're going to be using. These are all the different halls, and then we can actually go in and schedule the time slots or delete a hall. Yeah, I can do a couple of that right now. No, I don't want to do that. But you can actually go in and schedule the time slots. For example, this year, time slots for the advanced halls are going to be 20 minutes. Time slots for the plus and mainstream halls are obviously going to be 10 minutes. And time slots for the C1 and C2 halls are going to be 30-minute slots. And then time slots for Ken Ritucci are like 2 hours at a time.
Is that all?
And you can schedule the time slots, you can put them in the timing you want. But see, this is another thing where you're going to have to work with your other committees, because they're not going to want you scheduling slots for the opening ceremonies and things like that. So you're not going to plug in areas for those time slots. Then once you get all your time slots set up, and of course, this is the beauty of this thing, we can go to schedule, okay? So now I can look down and we can see the entire schedule for the convention if we want to, all right? It'll take some time to load it up because that particular spread, that particular layout's very, very big. So instead of going to that, I'm actually going to filter. I want just square dance. And I want to just look, let's just look at the C2 hall. So I'll come down here and I'll find the C2 hall. And in fact, I've already scheduled the C2 hall.
Bill Ackerman's name will be there.
Yeah, it is actually there. It's the very first one. Look at that right there. And then it should, then I gotta hit apply.
Guess I better buy my airplane tickets, huh?
Yeah. And so right here, I've got a workshop. This is a C2 workshop that's going to be done. Eric Hanelaw's, I've got him scheduled to do Thursday. I got Ken to do on Friday, and we got Daryl Lipscomb doing Saturday on that. Let's just say I didn't want Eric to do that, so I'm going to take Eric out of that spot. Okay, so I just took him off that spot. I haven't told him he hasn't yet, so don't worry. All right. So what I'm going to do is and for those that are watching on the tape, this is a drag and drop type program. Okay. So I'm going to go over and pull Steve Cotman to do that slot. We're on Thursday. Watch what's going to happen.
This is really cool. You just, notice he just dragged and dropped his name in. Oh, did it come up red?
Yeah, it came up
That's
red
what I
because
said earlier.
Steve Cotman's not available at this time. And the
Yeah.
reason he's not available at that time is he's only coming to the convention for Friday and Saturday, and that's how he set up his profile. So those profiles that Patty and everybody has been screaming at you guys to get done are very, very important to this program. So what that program, everything you put on that profile was factored into this. So now I can say, okay, well, I would have, and actually, the only reason I know this is because I actually did want Steve to do one of those things. Got him in some other things, but and so that tells me, so I'm going to hit OK, and then I'm going to take him back out because you can override it, leave it there, and then I'm going to go back and find Eric. Yeah, I'll give it to Eric if he's still here. Where there he is.
This is really a neat system. It's that easy.
So then I'll drop Eric back in, and what that's going to do. And the nice thing, I got to do the schedule of the advanced and challenge first. What that's going to do is when the band people and the plus people and the other schedules, when they go in to schedule somebody and they try to schedule Eric at 1 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, it's going to come back and say Eric's not available. It's going to come back and say Eric's not available. Also, I can look over here, and if you'll see, for example, Betsy, right? And Betsy sometimes doesn't have a lot of availability because she's doing things with Roy sometimes and things like that. But if you look right here, when I hovered over her name, it showed several of the calling slots that I've already scheduled her for. But that also includes any of the education panels that she might be involved in. And I can look at that. And see, that way I can also be fair a little bit, or make sure I'm not overworking somebody. If I hover over, if I want to pull somebody in there and hover over them, and then I see them, oh my gosh, Friday, she doesn't even have time for lunch. So, maybe I'll say, okay, well, maybe we'll put her on another Friday. So it gives me that advantage to be able to do that. And it's worked the same way with all the halls. A couple other things, and we don't want to go through the whole thing, but I want to show you that there is an ability. It's not as hard to schedule as it used to be because of this program. All your profiles, I can go in and manage the profiles. I can look up your profiles and see anything that needs to be done. Or if you call me up and say, Jack, I just can't make it Thursday, go in and cancel my slots. I'll go in and change your profile. Or if you call me up and say, hey, I'm feeling pretty good, I can call mainstream now, instead of just basics. And then I can go in and update your profile real quick. You can do it too, but if we need to do it like at last minute, we can do that. Presenters and events. I can get a list of the educators. Because if you're not signed up to be an educator, then I can't put you into a workshop slot. So, for example, if Ken hadn't signed up as an educator to begin with, the program would have told me he's not an educator, he's not registered as an educator, and I can't put him in there. So if you want to do workshops, you got to make sure you put that on your profile. Time slot, schedule. There's one other thing, we're not going to look at it. If I can find it.
If anyone's thinking of any questions at all,
Yeah.
Jeff, you got the microphone there.
Ken's got the microphone. One more thing, I'm not going to open it up before the question. One more thing we can do is we can actually go in and, how do you want to say this? Rate the callers, okay, based on what we know is their abilities and levels. I mean, I know some guys, and I know probably 2/3 of the people that sign up for the National Convention. And the 1/3 that I might not know, I know people in their areas. Like if somebody from the Northeast was to sign up and I didn't know who he was, I might call Ken and say, give me an opinion on this guy, okay? And I would want a professional opinion, not a personal opinion, he knows that. And that way I could make sure that we're putting him in the right spot. Or if I see some guy I don't know and he signed up to call C2, I might call up, Daryl or somebody and say, did this guy really call C2? And he'd tell me, no, he can't call C2. So, then I wouldn't put him in there. So we can actually go in and rate the callers based on, and we generally base it on festival type callers, years in the service, things like that, all the way down to beginner callers. Yeah, all the way down to beginner callers.
Jeff, you know,
All right, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff Palmer, Colorado Spring. That's phenomenal, but I assume you have to populate something first to get that information.
That's the beauty of it. You don't have to populate it. That's your registration committee. That's why you have to stay in handy in your registration committee. When a caller signs up to come to the convention and they put it on their sheet that they want to be a caller, they're going to be populated into the NCOs.
Okay.
Then they kick it back to you being the programmer, and they kick it back to you and say, this person signed up as a caller, and they'll come electronically as well. And what you'll do is now watch for their profiles. And we ask you guys to get these profiles in like January, and sometimes that's hard, and then we have to chase somebody down. And we've done that. We say we won't, but we want to be fair. We want to give everybody a chance because everything is now electronic profiles. We don't do paper profiles anymore. There's some of us not ready to go electronic yet.
So the whole thing is a big balloon, if you
Yes.
will, and everybody feeds into
Yeah,
that.
every committee on the convention has an
Okay.
area.
Well, that clears
We each
it
have
up.
our own area. So the programming committee has area, the round dance people, all the different venues of dancing, facilities, education. It's Barry Johnson did a fantastic job on
yeah,
it.
it's all there. Then you could filter out, like every time I'd go in to keep working on the schedule, I would just go to the callers and the only day would show up. I didn't want to look at contra leaders or round dance cuers because I didn't have any jurisdiction over them or anything. And one thing you have to be aware of too, and I'll use Betsy God as an example because she's a very good example. Betsy can do contras, and she's needed for round dancing. If Roy has to do a teach, and her time has to be allowed for her to be with Roy to do a teach. So, and of course she does the squares. So, the ones that the callers that can do multiple things are obviously going to probably be busier at these types of conventions and festivals.
Absolutely. And another good, and we're using Betsy as an example, but
She's a good example.
she's a great example because she is so busy. She would be one of those that you want to make sure you give her some time between halls. So if I go in and schedule Betsy at 1 o'clock to do a plus tip, for example, and then she's supposed to be in the C2 hall at 1:30, it's going to come and tell me. It's going to say, well, Betsy is going to be in C2 or wherever at 1:30, and that'll give me a little mental picture of can she actually make it from one hall to the next? Do we want to give her some more time and not schedule that? So that's another beauty of that particular program.
Yeah, Bill Ackerman's got a question right here. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, Bill Ackerman, Boston area. Going way back to like 20 minutes ago before you started putting on NCOS, you mentioned stuff about programming novelty things like hex and old calls and whatever.
Right.
And that you didn't say where the information or impetus for making the decisions that those go in the morning or afternoon or whatever it came from. Is that from your own experience, or do you look at availability of callers for that? Or do higher authorities tell you that this is the way it's done? How do you make the decisions about slots in the day when novelty stuff is done?
I can answer that, and again, I'll use the Springfield Convention. Of course, all the years I've done the New England too, but it's on a much smaller scale because it's more regional. I try to do most of my workshopping and stuff in the morning. I felt that some national conventions have workshops in the afternoon after lunch. I personally never did, but I would do things like hex. I would know on the profile sheet we put hex. So I know some of the callers who call hex. I know you do, and Eric and a few others. And I would put you in for those automatically because I don't call hex. It's not something I'm interested in. It's not a specialty of mine. So I want to get the people that can do that kind of stuff. Just like you want to put the best in certain things. And I made sure that those callers would get like hex dancing, plus DVDs, some really specialize in that kind of stuff. And I made sure that they were put in those kind of spots as well. I just felt comfortable out of 250 callers, I gotta admit, I felt comfortable knowing about maybe 225 of them.
Yeah. But I think also in answer to your question, Bill, you have to work with your committee, other committee chair people, the other committees, say like the education committee. They will kind of say when they want to do certain things. And they will say, okay, well, you're going to have your hex workshop at 10 o'clock or whatever. Then, you know, those are the kind of things. So it does come from a higher level sometimes, and then other times.
And from your own personal preference.
From our own personal
And
preference.
in the case of New England Convention, that's the way we've done it for 10 years.
Yeah, and but you have to know, with anything, you have to know the right people to put in the right spots. I mean, I don't want to put somebody in there who's never really done hex, but they say, well, I want to try it. Well, you know, you don't want to do somebody who I want to try it.
Yeah, that's not the place. So that kind of leads me, that's kind of a segue into what we're going to talk about now is programming, the actual programming and the philosophy, or at least our philosophy behind what makes us decide how to program. All right. So the first thing, and we've kind of covered a little bit of this already, learn about callers, learn their capabilities, and learn their limitations. And this is slippery slope. Okay, I'm going to tell you, this is where sometimes feelings can get hurt and things like that. It is a slippery slope, and you might have to have a thick skin here, but you have to be honest with your friends. You've got say you're scheduling the national convention and you got your local friends and they say, I'm going to come to the national convention, can I get a 9 o'clock slot in the Plus Hall on Saturday night? I call 3 dances a year, and I'm like, sorry dude, I can't do it. Well, I ain't taking you to lunch anymore. You got to be careful. It's a slippery slope. Use the profiles, but remember, the profiles are only as good as what information people put in them. And you'd be surprised how many national callers we have in square dancing. I'm serious. And and how many callers have been calling for 100 years and things like that. So remember, that can be fudged a little bit. That's why I think it's important that I contact people that I trust for their opinions. I wouldn't call somebody that I'm not that familiar with as far as professional relationship and ask them, I wouldn't just pick somebody out of Washington State and say, hey, do you know this other guy? I would make sure it's somebody that I can trust and I would trust their opinion. Group by abilities to understand where they best fit. Okay, what I mean by abilities. So you want to group all your C2 callers. You don't want them all over the place. You want to group all the guys that can do hex. As Ken said, you want to group the guys that can do this, and then you're going to understand, where their best fit is. You need to know their level of calling, the highest level they can do, their experience levels. You need to try to understand that. Are they local callers, regional callers, travel, festivals, teaching? Teaching's important. You got to make sure they do what they say they do. If they're going to talk the talk, they got to be ready to walk. Availability for the convention. This is important, and especially if you're not using NCOs programs like that. If you're still using paper, you got to know if a guy's not going to make it in by 8 o'clock on Friday night. If he's traveling or something like that, you can't schedule those slots if they're not going to be there. So make sure you understand everybody's availability. And then the plan, and this is where it starts. Workshops, special interest sessions, prime time, and you notice I put priority given to experience and product. And Ken was kind of, discussing that a little bit. Prime time is usually the evening slots, 7 to 10, or whatever the case may be. And this goes throughout all the halls, in my opinion. Advanced challenge, plus mainstream band, whatever the case may be. And my philosophy is to put the best product we have in the prime time. But you still have to mix in some things, You still have to, give priority to legends of our activity and things of that nature. And we all know who, you know, the legends would be and things like that. But we need to put the best product we have in the evenings. And then, if there's still some spots available, then we start looking at the up-and-comers and some of the guys that are working hard. You gotta remember, another thing that a lot of people forget is a lot of these guys, these so-called primetime guys, all right, they're coming to the convention using it as a trade show for their business. You know, if they're gonna quit coming if all we do is put them at 9 o'clock in the morning, all right? And then put, you know, all the local guys that nobody knows in the evening. And I've seen that at national conventions. So we're gonna lose guys. I remember at one national convention, not too many years ago, about a dozen of the primetime guys got up on Saturday morning, went home because they had no calling slots. Remember that?
I do.
Yeah.
And you lose dancers too.
Yeah, and the
You'll lose
dancers will
dancers.
too. So, yeah, and that's another sticky situation, so that's where you gotta have that thick skin. And then the rest, that's when you start scheduling the rest. Now, here's my philosophy on how I schedule. If a guy calls all the way through C2, all right, and I know he's a very, very accomplished caller, all right, then I'm gonna start by scheduling the C2 hall first. He's going to get a C2 slot, and I'm going to look at his profile. He's going to get a C2 slot. The next thing I'm going to put him in the advance. And then if I'm doing the rest of it, which this time I'm only the assistant, so I'm not, then I'm going to put him in the plus hall. Then I'm going to put him in the mainstream hall or the band hall if he has to. Make sure that guy gets a little bit of everything. He deserves it. You know, he's worked for years. I don't expect the high-level callers to be happy with only calling one level. All right? And you shouldn't expect them to be happy with only calling one level unless they tell you. But I guarantee you, you know, Ken, he calls all the levels, but he's not going to be happy to be in the C2 hall the entire time.
That's right.
Yeah. All right? Generally, these guys that call all the levels, and this stands to the reason most of the time, they've done this because they've worked hard and over a lot of years to reach this level of expertise. Talent should be shared across the board. And like I said, I generally start assigning these callers first, beginning with the highest level, working down to the lowest level. And then, you know, then just the guys that do advanced on down, then plus on down, okay? And let me make one more statement here, and I'll probably be done with my side. When I did the Cincinnati National, we did something a little bit different at the Cincinnati National that made it even more difficult to get a lot of calling slots. We limited the halls. We didn't have 4 mainstream halls and 3 plus halls and you know, all that kind of stuff like some of them, because you know, we were looking at some of the couple previous conventions, you had all these different halls and you had 6 squares in one, in every one of them, you know.
Less than that.
Yeah, we went down to 1 plus hall, all right, we had 1 plus hall, that was it. We didn't have a plus with rounds, we might have had a little specialty thing going on, you know, maybe a special entrance session, but we had 1 plus hall. We had the mainstream hall, which was the band hall. We had a mainstream hall, but it was not attended well at all. And then we had the advanced and challenge hall. That was it. So slots were limited. If you only called mainstream and plus, or if you only called plus, you might have only got 1 slot or 2 slots, you know, because we had 190 callers come. So with 190 callers and less halls, but my philosophy was I'd rather call 1 slot to 50 squares than 5 slots to 3 squares. That was the philosophy.
Yeah, a couple other things. If you have questions, just raise your hand. We'll take the questions as we go along. Do some prep work. I know we had mentioned it already. Try to visit the halls you're going to program. And normally you do that with a dancer committee. But if you feel certain halls need to be for certain programs, you know, fight for it. I used to do that. I'd say, no, you can't put advanced in another building where the challenge is, let's just keep it all together, it makes more sense, whatever, or this hall's gonna be too small for what you wanna do. So fight, do your layout, do your walkthroughs, and don't be afraid to speak up, because lots of times, you know, the dancers might not know. Coordinate with the round dance people, okay? The round dancers, especially at the national, they usually get some of the most beautiful halls with the wooden floors, and they deserve it because when they do those big showcases, they need that kind of flooring and they need that kind of space. So learn, if you're ever gonna program a national, learn right off that you're going to have to be upfront with the round dance cuers right off the bat and say, you know, and sometimes you just dictated that those are the round dance halls, so be it, and you work with someone else. And be careful, when I was in Spokane, I was waiting to call an advance tip, and it was early afternoon, and I don't know the gentleman in front of me, but I felt sorry for him. He called his first of 2 tips in the A2 hall, and he gets off the stage and he comes to me, and he doesn't really know me. He goes, "Will you take my next spot?" He says, "I don't really call this stuff." And he felt he was nervous and he's sweating, and he didn't do a good tip. And I said, "Yeah, sure, I will," but leads me to believe in how he got scheduled. Well, sometimes these callers get in these situations because they do say, "Well, yeah, I can do A2, but can they really do A2? I mean, you know, if you've done a couple of tips of A2, or maybe one dance in your career, do you want to get up at a bigger convention and call it? I don't know." And sometimes you can't blame the caller programmer because they may say, "Well, Jack signed up for A2. I don't know Jack, but he signed up for it. I need guys to do that spot. I need callers." So Jack gets A2, and then Jack gets up there and says, after one tip, comes up to the next guy behind him and says, "Can you do my spot?" I said, "Because I don't really call this stuff." So you gotta be careful, things like that. And again, like Jack had mentioned, if there are callers that sign up and you have no clue what they do, please try to reach out to somebody. Bear Miller just called me about Atlanta, some of the callers that signed up for live music. And we went through all the ones he had questions with. Some I didn't even know, and some I would give my opinion whether they should do live music or not. But it's better that you ask the questions ahead of time instead of putting somebody in a spot where they're not going to be able to perform. And the other thing I thought of was, sometimes in regional areas there might be some really popular callers that are, you know, loved in their area. Or maybe they're younger callers in their early 20s or something, and they're up and coming, and they're not quite, you know, they're not national callers, they don't travel, but they're really popular. I would try to highlight some of those callers because the local dancers are going to be there, and then they've sort of earned it in some ways. So it's not just, I don't want to give the image it's just national callers that we highlight. Sometimes there's some really hot regional callers and especially the youth callers that you should highlight. Yes, Ken?
Yeah, Ken Jordan from Virginia. A couple of the pitfalls, especially with your local conventions, you know, your state festivals and whatnot. When you're programming callers, don't give the same callers the hour before lunch and the hour after lunch, because then you have shortened their lunchtime. They don't even get the full, if there's an hour break, because they're trying to get out of the hall, go put their stuff away, go have lunch, and then they get either that or they're saddled, eating right there in the facility. Don't schedule them for the last tip in a hall when you have them as the MC in another hall the next hour. And these are all things that we have all been through. The end of the night. Scheduling them for the last half hour of the night, or scheduling them for, if you do an after a Die Hard or whatever, and then give them the workshop at 9 or 10 o'clock the next morning. You don't get any sleep. Just things, just pitfalls that we see that happen, that we have struggled through in different smaller state conventions. You know, this year, Virginia, I think we're going to have 12 callers for the Thursday night, all day Friday night, Saturday night. So, yeah, we're going to work. Most of us are doing 10, 12, 14 slots in that time period. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting thing.
Yeah, and that's a point too, is if it's a multiple day convention, double check that you haven't given the same caller either opening a hall or closing a hall or just before supper or just at the last of the night. Because sometimes that could be overlooked, you know, like Jack's opening up Friday morning at 10 a.m. and gee, I didn't know on Saturday I got him again opening at 10, or I got him closing at 4:30 to 5 just before supper. you don't want to give the same caller multiple spots like that, because as we all know, you may be scheduled to call 4:30 to 5, but especially at the bigger conventions, the dancers start leaving for supper at 3, 3:30, 4. You know, they want to get out there before the restaurants get crowded. So even sometimes a 4 o'clock spot might look really good, and it's not as good as it used to be because we don't have the amount of dancers anymore. Questions? Yeah.
Mike
And then
Gormley. Mike Gormley from Central Florida. Regarding filling out a form for you to use, judging me, for instance. I have a situation, West Virginia Convention, I'm going there, and last year I was there, and they sometimes, advance halls, okay? That sometimes they tell me that, well, we would have advance if we had an advanced caller. We don't always have advanced callers, that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm willing to call advanced. However, I don't site call advanced. I would only be using cards or written material, okay? I'm willing to do that. And if I put that in my form in that fashion where I spell it all out, that I'm willing to do it, but it would be written material that I'm using. I mean, I assume you would want that kind of information, correct, on the form?
I'll be honest with you, no, I don't need that information. You're not the only caller at the advanced and above level that reads. There's a lot of guys out there that are reading. You don't have to be a site caller to call advanced. You don't have to be a site caller to call basic and mainstream. So I don't know that that would be information I'd want to have on a card or on a profile. You don't need to give me that information, as long as you read well.
I mean, from my point of view, as a caller applying to, you know, call at the convention, I want you to know where I'm coming from, but I'm willing to do it.
But if you're not telling me, now if you're telling me I don't, I read because I don't know what I'm doing, you know, that's why you're telling me, then yeah, maybe that's something I would like to know. But if you're a reader, there's nothing wrong with readers. I read at C1 and above, and I read a lot in advance. You know, because there's a lot of good choreography out there that can be had by written material and not site calling all the time. So no, I don't need to know that you're a reader, unless you're telling me because you can't do the level. Then I want to know.
Yeah, if you said something like, well, I don't call advance, but I wrote a few sequences, you know, and I'm not.
Yeah, exactly.
Roy?
Roy.
Thanks, Roy Goddard, New Jersey. If you give me a second or two to talk about the philosophy, and I can't emphasize how important the way you guys did it is. The reason that the challenge, if you're doing a festival or a convention with multiple programs, the reason that the challenge program has deteriorated so much at the national conventions is that for decades, people who did all of the programs, they were in the challenge halls, and they were locked in there. And the programming committee had a philosophy, well, each caller is going to get no more than 8 slots, just to pick a number. It's the way it used to be. So you would get your 6 slots in the C1 and C2 and 1 advanced, and you might get a morning plus 5 minutes. And so you're calling those 8 slots to the same, 35 dancers. And so what happened was the best of the challenge callers all quit the national convention. Even Betsy at one point for a couple of years stopped signing up for challenge. And those people, they don't mind doing the extra work, but their bread and butter is still the mainstream and plus dancers. Ed Foote said this morning, over 50% of his home dances are mainstream and plus. So, and the same thing applies to people who also do contours and rounds. They were getting penalized for taking the time to get proficient in multiple programs. Now, you guys did a fantastic job, and as a matter of fact, I stopped signing up for rounds unless I knew the square and round dance programmers, because they held those round dance slots against Betsy slots. So, and I'm not trying to, bid on a soapbox here. I know some of you are here because you're probably going to be involved in programming. some of these conventions. And we program a US and a Canadian convention, so we know the ins and outs and the details of that. But, so just keep that in mind when you're programming these folks, that they don't mind working extra, but they don't want to be penalized for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely, and another good point that Roy made was when the callers that do the higher levels that faded away from the conventions because they didn't want to be stuck in the same hall. Well, what happens then? The dancers start fading away because the dancers are going to dance to these guys or girls, and that's what we're seeing at our conventions. Our better callers are not going because of being penalized. I like to say penalized, just being stuck because they do well in another hall, and that's when our dancers start going away. So it's an effect. Bill?
Yeah, Bill Ackerman again from Boston. I have read, or I've heard about and observed with my own eyes, a tendency or temptation, or whatever you want to call it, to program less experienced and less skillful callers at basic or easy mainstream, or the lower programs where I happen to believe the dancers need TLC. And how do you address that?
Yeah, we have that situation in New England too. We have, we call it an easy mainstream hall. And last year I had this year I'm making it easy mainstream with very little singing call time. Last year was more singing call time, but some of the festival people came to me and said, you know, you really need to put some of the better callers in those halls because you're putting in the brand new callers and they're not as experienced. So it's a fine line you walk because some of these callers that have signed up, they can really only do mainstream. So they're limited by what they can do. So do you give them just one spot for the whole weekend only because they do mainstream, or so this year I've sprinkled in, I put myself in as well, to try to just bring in a little bit, stronger callers that can handle the program. Jack?
So and I agree with Bill 100% on this. And one of the things that I do, I guess I couldn't put this in the presentation, but one of the things I like to do is similar to what Ken does, like say it's Saturday afternoon, I'll sprinkle in the experienced callers in between, like every other, because it helps keep the crowd there too. If you put all your brand new callers back to back to back to back to back to back, then then people are just going to walk away. And another thing, which brings up a good point, I'm noticing at conventions and festivals that I've been calling lately, over the last year or so, the daytime dancing numbers are picking up. The nighttime dancing numbers are going down. Our dancers don't stay out so late anymore. They're done by 9 o'clock. I mean, I at home only dance 7 to 9 o'clock anymore. And I'm seeing the daytime numbers picking up and the nighttime numbers going down. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you're considering programming. Does somebody have another question?
Yeah, another question, Jeff?
Yeah, Jeff again, Colorado Springs. I really appreciate what you said, because I think it takes a better experienced caller to call to less experienced dancers. I think if you put a new caller in with new dancers, that's a formula for disaster. It also is hard on the caller and the dancers as well. And I think it'll also sour those new ones about coming back out again, where they get somebody of a decent caliber, then they'll have a good time and they'll come back and they'll progress and move up, and it'll just be better for everybody. And I also appreciate the fact you say you're not going to limit slots for somebody that does higher level or different material. I think that's very important for the reasons you just said. To recap it, if you will, if the guy calls clear up to C4 and he still wants to call mainstream or plus, I think that's very important to let that person do that and spread that out and give them the opportunity to do that. And it's good for the dancers too. I think it's very good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's been an old fight for many, many, many years, that people get their spots, and the callers who call the lower programs will say, well, Bob Butler, you gave him 12 spots. I only got 6 or 4 or 5. And he says, well, Bob Butler calls through C1, or he's calling in a lot of advance. He says, so he's going to have more spots. Another thing to bring up, I made a note, was callers who register for these things and then they only want to call Friday night or Saturday night, or, you know, they don't want Saturday morning. I got that at the New England Convention, I'm sure Bob can relate. There's some callers that says, I don't want to call Saturday morning, but I'm willing to call Friday night and mid to late Saturday afternoon, and of course they want to call Saturday night. So what? I accommodate them. I don't schedule them when they don't want to call, but they don't get as many spots either, because they're not here the whole time. So think about that when you're scheduling these callers. You know, look at the ones that say, I will be available the whole convention, morning, afternoon, and evening. They're going to have a better opportunity when I'm scheduling to get a lot more spots. The ones who handpick it, now sometimes it might be, well, we're going to go on tours in the morning, or, you know, lots of times though, they simply just don't want to be there in the morning because they know that there's not going to have as big a crowd. So they want to be there in the prime time hours. And that's not going to cut it with me, because if you limit your time, you limit your spots. Yeah, Bob Butler, right behind you, Ken.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Bob Butler, Massachusetts. But I heard what you said about, you know, putting good callers in with the less experienced dancers. But a lot of those good callers also can do plus A1, A2, and you have all those slots, or C1 and C2, and you have those slots to fill too. How do you do that?
First of all, I want to qualify. I don't really say good callers or bad callers, okay? I want to make sure everybody understands that. I like to consider, you know, the experience level and things like that. But again, to answer your question, that's where programming, that's where moving people around is gonna, you know, gonna come in play. You're gonna have to, you know, understand that these guys, we're gonna need him over in these other higher level halls as well, but we still need to get him into that mainstream hall. So maybe you don't put him in the higher level hall until later in the evening or something like that. I'm not sure there's a defined answer to that question, but.
Well, it's a good question. It depends on the amount of callers you have too, Bob. I don't feel like, I don't put all experienced callers in like an easy mainstream hall. I'll put some, I'll sprinkle them in and make it as strong as I can, but I'll still have, you know, mid-experienced callers, and then I don't really try to put the newbies in there, but and then you may have to limit the amount of time at a hall. You know, maybe you cut the advanced hall and close it an hour early or something. That eliminates 3 spots right there. So you're not overworking 4 or 5 certain callers just to get them in everything. You know, if they don't get a lot of advanced, but they get some, but you've used them in other halls, that's fine. I'm a proponent of closing halls early. If better to close a hall early than have 3 callers and 20-minute spots in the A2 hall, have 1 square, you know, and by, you know, 9:40 or 10:40 at night, depending when the hall closes, you know, they're dragging in there, and it doesn't matter who's gonna go in and call, people take off, you know, they're tired, especially if they dance to the caller during the day. They don't want to stick around till 11 o'clock at night. So don't be afraid to limit some of the hall time, and that can shorten up some of the spots for the callers. And yet at the same time, you're taking those experienced callers and you're putting them in some of these other halls where they might be needed. You can't do it, you can't do everything. You can't put everybody everywhere. I mean, something's got to give.
Another reason why it's my opinion that people on our professional level should be doing this programming, and not the dancers. The dancers love them to death. You know, they work hard, and they run our clubs, and you know, they work hard for our festivals and everything. But when it comes to programming the professional portion of your festivals and conventions, I think we need more professionals doing that. And of course, everybody in this room is a professional because you belong to CALLERLAB. And you know, it reflects well on us. It reflects well on you know, our profession if you're up there. And trust me, it's a thankless job. You know, there's going to be some people that thank you. And actually, I did get, you know, some dancers like, oh man, you guys did a really good job of programming and everything. but it's a thankless job. Don't go into it expecting to, get a lot of accolades and things like that. Mr. Bo Beardy.
Yeah, from North Carolina. One thing that we haven't covered at all is the fact that after we've done all of this great work of scheduling everybody, and the guy calls you up the day before, I've got kidney stones, I've got the flu, or you only put me on one spot and I don't like it, I'm just not gonna come.
Absolutely, absolutely.
They're in a pickle.
Absolutely, Bo, that will happen, and that happened, I can guarantee you, on the Cincinnati National Convention on Thursday morning, I sat in the programming room for a straight 10.
Say 4 featured callers all night long, just 4 callers only, as opposed to maybe 12 callers, of the top level. They're still top level callers, the top 12, say, in the state. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What's the pros and cons of all that?
Would they all be volunteer? You're talking about the
Yes,
Florida
it's
State
all
Convention?
volunteers. Actually, yes,
All right, yeah, I understand.
this past year.
You gotta be careful, something like that. Like the New England Convention's a good example. We all volunteer our time. There's been attempts through the years to talk about maybe bringing in 1 or 2, national people, like some of the state conventions do. It's always been shut down. It's a very touchy subject because everyone gets upset, that they're not gonna get equal spots. I don't know, I'm aware of your Florida State Convention or State Festival. And I don't know if you want to do that. You could ruffle a lot of feathers and upset people, like, why'd you pick him? You didn't pick me. Why'd you pick her? I don't know. I mean, that's pretty gutsy to do that. Those are the ones, again, it's sort of like the New England Convention, and Bob certainly knows this. I just take the best of the best, and I give them the prime spots at night where it's going to be a fun time. And in some ways, to me, that's sort of, quote, highlighting them without highlighting them. You got to be careful. When all the callers at your festival are volunteering their time, it's not a good time to blatantly start singling out people and maybe featuring them. Now, if the committee has people that are flying in, they're paying 2 or 3 callers, they're getting paid to be featured. But when it's an all-volunteer event, I wouldn't do that. I think you're going to cause a lot of dissension among the ranks.
Yep, totally agree. If it was the objective for your convention committee to do something like that, and I know what you're talking about, I understand, then, maybe that's what their objective is. But you as a programmer shouldn't just take that upon yourself to focus on 4 callers to do the entire evening. That's the way I feel about it.
Yeah, it was an,
Yeah, Bo,
I think it was an experimental.
It's
Let's try
experimental.
this,
Sure. Last question, Bo, then we got
That's not a question, just a comment on the same thing we were just talking about. Bo Byerly from North Carolina. Our federation not only has a state convention, but we also have what we call quarterly dances. And they're like one-day festivals. Just an afternoon and an evening, and we have just 1 or 2 halls, depending on the site that we're at. It was a big controversy for us to get away from using just volunteer callers because our attendance was falling and falling and falling. And we finally decided we were going to designate 1 dance, not the state convention, but one of the other quarterly dances, in which we were going to feature an out-of-state caller in order to create buzz, create some more excitement about the quarterly dances, because it was an attendance problem. We were doing best on the fact that when we started, for the longest time, it took a big controversy just to add an advanced hall. And once we did, we had more people dancing in there than we had out on the other floor. And you can't turn down that money, or the people coming. So when we finally did it, we had to be very, very careful not to ruffle feathers, to
to actually get everyone's okay that yes, we are going to bring in an outside caller, we're gonna pay them, and we're gonna advertise it, and we're gonna just try and create interest, and it is for our benefit as the callers who normally slog in the trenches all year long, trying to generate some excitement about our activity, and doing it for free with the Federation. And yeah, and I still have callers that do not like bringing in an outside caller.
Yeah.
Oh, they're not happy at all.
That's always an ongoing, a very sensitive subject, but hey, we'd like to thank you for your time today. How about a nice hand, Mr. Jack Pladdys?
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Good luck on your programs, and if you are programming, we'll be glad to advise if you ever need us.
If you have any questions, give us a call. Enjoy the rest of the convention. Thank you. All right.